And I said, why don't you get a hold of those that were in the board meeting that you called and tell them that I'm calling the meeting tonight, and let them know the purpose of that meeting is I'll be reading my letter of resignation to the board.
Wow.
And I'm expecting you to either receive it or apologize for acting like a board of directors, not a board of advisors.
Interesting.
And he's like, his eyes got big. And because in our church, and a lot of churches, the board bully whips the pastor.
Yeah.
And so pastors don't have, the stress of knowing, am I the leader, or what do I do? And so and you might not want to share this podcast after the story. I don't know.
No, I think it's real. This is real stuff.
Well, and other people deal with it and don't know what to do. Yeah.
Well, welcome, Mark Zweifel, Dr. Mark Zweifel.
Oh, man.
We had some good times.
Dr. Shane.
Yeah, you beat Shane by 1 year because you finished on time, right?
Yeah,
I think you walked a year
ahead,
early.
I think. Didn't you finish ahead?
He walked a year ahead because you couldn't walk because of COVID.
Were you on time or ahead?
But Shane was slower to walk when he was born too, so we don't hold that against.
That's right. Oh my gosh, Mark, so good to have you on the podcast with us. We have loved being able to be with you, and just we've seen you in action, and True North Church is amazing. It's incredible. You just got 2 inches of snow outside there. You keep getting snow every day. I'm just amazed at the beauty of Alaska.
Yeah, we love it. We need to know when your next retreat is that we can come to, because
that's right.
Now we've done Alaska 2 years in a row and we're a little spoiled. We want to come back.
But listen, to our listeners who don't know you, Mark, tell us a little bit about, Pastor Mark began a church in a beautiful area in Alaska.
Fairbanks.
In Fairbanks, and with 81 people.
87.
You're right. Man, this is horrible.
That's why it takes two of us.
It takes two of us. So
keep
these
rolling,
87, well, now I know this, that they have over 1,500 people in attendance every single week, a decade later. But there's so many stories in that. Tell us a little bit about the story of True North.
I was district youth director here. First of all, honored to be on the podcast. And you guys are incredible. I was telling you before we started that our staff, we had you up here for our staff retreat, and which was just an incredible time. And you guys talked about how to deal with, making sure your soul is healthy, and how to deal with just practical pragmatics of that. And you guys did an incredible job. My staff says it's their all-time favorite retreat. So you set the bar pretty high.
What?
Yay.
And so great job.
Praise
Honor
God.
to be here with you guys. It's been a great 10 years. I moved to Alaska from Las Vegas, believe it or not.
Wow.
In 2008. And the Bible says to be hot or cold, but not lukewarm. So Seattle was out, Vegas was out, and now I'm in cold. And so here I am. And, 10 years ago, took First Assembly of God, Fairbanks First. Now it's True North Church. And it's the fourth pastor in 4 years. So it was a difficult challenge, but that's what probably intrigued me by the church. And I remember I moved here, and, 87 people our first Sunday. I shared the salvation message every Sunday. I mean, I youth pastored in two great churches where we saw people get saved every week. And so I thought that was normal. And so I move here, I give a salvation altar call for 3 months, and nobody gets saved.
Wow.
And five minutes after service, everyone's gone. And I'm like, I think they hate me, and I'm not sure if I like them. And then, but part of it was because they'd been so hurt with so much turnover with pastoral staff. And so, but man, one day, a lady named Cindy Morin got saved, and Cindy was a heroin addict, had gotten out of jail, brought her boyfriend whose son had just had a drug overdose, and Cindy and her husband accepted Christ. And the next week they had a row of drug addicts. and
Wow.
nonstop, people getting saved every week. I mean, it's just that. And so that really was the catalyst of what happened. I can't take credit. It was a sovereign thing that God did in Fairbanks, Alaska. Also, it's unique. It's not always fair to say, well, this church grew like this. We have uniquenesses. We have 2 military bases within a half-hour radius. And so the government stocks our fishing pond with new people. And some churches don't have that liberty to have new people constantly feed and come to their church to change narratives. And so we're unique in that. But man, God's been so good. We a couple things we did was we looked at the demographics of our community, and the average age of Fairbanks is 28 to 32, depending on what demographic you look at. And the reality is they didn't have a strong kids ministry here. I'm thinking like 46% of Fairbanks has someone in the house under the age of 11. So if you have 46% of your community has someone who's under the age of 11, that means almost half your community has kids that can fill a kids ministry, and they would shut down their kids ministry every summer. And I'm thinking like, so we just started kids ministry up. We ramped it up in the summer, did extra things, got new families to come. God was good. And so, the growth has been incredible. We can't take credit for all of it other than God's been good. Too good. How's that? I don't know if you have any questions on that. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it's amazing. I'm blown away at the growth and the opportunity, but I'm also blown away the health of your church. Just so healthy. I mean, people coming to Jesus every week, being discipled. That's been incredible to watch over the years, and really, really, really been neat.
Yeah, what I love about your story is your willingness to contextualize your ministry for your area of the country. Alaska, as we have found out in visiting, just by visiting, it's such a unique place. It's unlike any other state that we've been in, and you have different demographics of people. You talked about the military and the young people. Of course, you've got indigenous tribes, you've got Native American people. What would you say? How did you accomplish getting people to contextualize, or maybe they didn't know and it was an easy sell? But I think in the U.S., the lower 48, I think churches have a little bit harder time getting people to go into their immediate communities. Everybody wants to be the big, mega church and do the Hillsong worship and whatever, which is great, fine, you know what I'm saying, but maybe a little bit less willing to see who is surrounding them and meet their needs.
Yeah, how did you meet them where they are? Yeah.
That's a great question. I think, first of all, I was a youth pastor, and in my 20 years of youth ministry, district youth director, I guess. So in 20 years of youth ministry, 14 of that in local church, I was employed at 2 mega churches where for the first time in my life, I realized, okay, if I'm not effective, they can fire me. And sometimes in ministry, we see longevity as more important than maybe even competence or effectiveness.
Right.
And I've always been a soul winner. So I was blessed in the large churches I was at to work for people who were just radical soul winners. Fulton Montaigne, who was Mark and Holden Montaigne, Calcutta Mission of Mercy. Fulton grew a church from 250 to 5,000 back before megachurches were everywhere. And he always said this, and this is something that we did here, and it answers your question, Sue, is he says, the church is created to fight. And if we don't fight battles outside the walls of the church for souls, we start fighting battles over the side, kind of the carpet, the worship style, all these things. So when I moved here, again, 4th pastor in 4 years, it was a worship war church. It was a worship war church. And when they interviewed me, they said, well, what's worship style? I says, style's not the question. The question is how bad do you want your grandkids to be here? If your grandkids love this church, you wouldn't care about style because you want your grandkids to serve Jesus. The problem is everyone in this church is over the age of 60, and there's not young people, and you love it because your preference, you like it's yours. Right. So one of the first things we did was, again, started sharing the salvation message. No one gets saved. People started getting saved, started telling stories over and over. And then we started planning events. And so the first event we did was a wild game feed. It's Alaska. And so we got a free wild game feed. And this was before Donald Trump became our president, but he wasn't as polarizing before he ran for president or when he was president. So Donald Trump's former chef accepted Christ in our church in Las Vegas. So I flew up Gino Sciaccarelli, who's this bigger than life guy, and he cooks this incredible dinner, and we packed out. Our church may be at this time, it's November, it's after hunting season. We maybe had 150 people now. We maybe had, almost doubled, but still 150 people small. And we had 250 men show up for this event because Donald Trump's chef was cooking, and we had bear and
Wow.
musk ox and moose and all this stuff and sheep.
Awesome.
And he tells his story. We give away guns and rifles and all this stuff. And the guys in my church are like, wow, Mark, people came.
Yeah.
And so we started, we have what I wrote this is what I wrote my project on for my dissertation, was on what I call the gospel road system. And it's how do you as a church, we're really good at what I call crossing the bridge of culture to biblical times, hermeneutics, understanding the Bible and bringing it back to a church culture and applying it to a culture here. So we have the biblical culture we want to apply here. And I call that the Ezra Bridge. We're good at crossing the Ezra Bridge and unpacking biblical truth for our church culture, but we're not good at the Issachar Bridge, which is how do we unpack biblical truth to be a man of Issachar who know the times and know what to do. And so as a church, we said, listen, we're going to unpack biblical truth to our church, but we want to do it in a way that crosses cultural bridges to people far from God. And so I call it the gospel road system, and it's two things. It's come and see and go and tell. How do we create a come and see culture? So our culture has to be something where when they come and see, our kids ministry is organized, it's on time, it's excellent. We do the best with what we have. And when we're small, our excellence looks different than when we're larger. And our Sunday morning services, we end with a salvation gospel message the same way every single Sunday. And I had an older associate pastor who says, Mark, why do you share the gospel message the same way every Sunday? Don't you think people are going to get tired of it? I said, I'm not sharing it the same way every week so people get tired of it. I'm sharing it the same way every week. So when people come and see, I'm raising people up to go and tell. I have 50 people who know how to share Jesus.
Right.
It's the same way every Sunday. So they know how to lead their Christ. And so now people say, oh, Mark, I led my neighbor to Jesus. I shared the ABCs with him, admit, believe, and confess. And so that's how it happened, was creating what I call an evangelism temperature in a local church. And there's lots of things we've done to steward that. But I want to help raise the entire temperature in our church for evangelists. So if someone's at a 1, do I get them to 2? If someone's at 5, do I get them to 6? And the goal was never for one person to lead 100 people to Jesus. The goal was for 100 people to lead one person to Jesus.
Wow.
And so that's how we kind of changed the narrative and got people outside the walls and just telling stories and water baptisms. Those things just kind of breed excitement. That's kind of how, again, what happened here it's not normal. Great staff, great volunteers, great people. It was just a sovereign thing that God helped us with.
Wow.
We can't take credit.
It's just amazing. And I know that we hear this story, and since Sue and I have seen your church and seen how healthy it is, on the surface, it's like when you visit somewhere, you just see all the wonderful things. When you live there, you've walked through many, many, many chapters. You walk through some stressful chapters, and a lot of our leaders listen. And we have been learning from leaders like yourself about how to walk through stressful seasons. So you've walked through some, like explosive growth is a stressful season. You transitioned a church, a long-time church, to get them out of this mindset into a new mindset. You went through all the same COVID we went through, not to mention another 100 problems and seasons of stress. Would you mind sharing a little bit with us some of those seasons that were extra stressful?
Yeah. Great question. Gosh, yeah, one of the seasons. Now I praise God for mentors. I had great mentors in my life that I was able to call, but there was a time in our growth. Again, we grew so fast, and when you grow, the stress is caused by probably three areas. Number one, your systems are always lag behind your growth, and so you're always catching up. And then structure, which is like the skeletal structure. When you grow, you have to change that. The systems are like the operating system within the skeletal structure. And then your staffing. And so for us, we lived under probably constant stress. And then one of our challenges with that is our auditorium seats 350 people, but our parking lot probably parks for 300 people or 250, including kids. And so our parking lot would be completely full. People are driving away, and our people go, well, why are we starting another service? Because our sanctuary is not full. Well, our sanctuary will never be full because our parking lot is full before our sanctuary is. And so part of it, we had to. So we actually we were at one time had 5 gatherings on Sunday, which is difficult. How can you be as Pentecostal as the Pentecostals want you to be? But yet, when people are getting saved and people are driving in and out of your parking lot, you have that balance of how do you create and how do you structure things for the different dynamics of our faith. So I actually put myself in a hospital because I was preaching all 5 gatherings because, call it ego, call it whatever. I'm the senior pastor. Look at the growth that's and it was because I thought I was having a heart attack, but it was actually GERD, which is, stomach acid problems. I'm losing my throat and I've got ulcers and I've got pain in my chest. And so I had to back away and I had to change. I don't preach all the gatherings anymore. And I had to, so we had to change the systems of how we did things. We had to change, which is, follow-up systems and all, but the structure, how do you change staff? Because a church under 500 has got the staff, the type of staff you need at a church under 500 is way different than above. And so when I got here, we were a family church run by a couple families. And then we had to shift that from a family church to a staff-led church to a program-oriented church to now where you got, for the lack of a better word, I don't like the word corporate structure, but you have, the leader, and then you have some middle managers who lead the staff or whatever. So for us, I think, and I don't know if that answers your question at all, Shane, but the stress of, it was tension all the time. I mean, we just kept growing. And every time, honestly, the first 5 years we were here, it seemed like everything we did, we just do it and we grow. And we grow 100 people overnight. We're like, what happened? And it was a sovereign thing, but very stressful. And we had to, so with that, what we did was, and I probably, we'll talk about this probably later, is I still hadn't figured out that I needed to probably change my rhythms more than anything else. I thought I had to lead better. All the ideas had to come from me. I had to sign all the checks. I had to do all those things. But we would hop on airplanes, our staff, because we're still, a smaller staff. And we would go to places that had 3 gatherings or 4 gatherings, and we'd spend a couple of days with that church. And then we go to another church and we just say, hey, how do you do this? How do you do this?
That's good.
And that helped us in those transitions. So lots of questions, lots of reading, lots of phone calls. And sometimes when you're in Alaska, you can't just hop in a car and drive a couple hours to a church over here that might be a larger to take cleaning from. We had to hop on an airplane.
I was going to ask you, in light of this problem and the previous question about a constantly changing audience congregation, how do you handle leadership development? Because if most people are in Alaska and they're servicemen or women and they're there for 3 years and then they're
Transplanted.
move someplace else, that doesn't give you a lot of time to raise up leaders and send them off, which is great from a missionary standpoint, that you're putting something into people and they're going other places, but you're not probably getting a lot of retention, or are you? How are you handling?
That's a great question. I think that's the blessing and the, I don't want to say curse. We never use that word. We've never lost a single military family. We've never lost a single military family. We've launched hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, as we grew, our building is 26,000 square feet, laid out very poorly. And so we couldn't do Sunday school classes. We couldn't do those things. So groups are our home plate. So I think this semester we have 45 to 50 groups. And so we do a lot of work training up our life group leaders, because in essence, they're doing a lot of the yeoman's task of the pastoral care of our church, because they would know, they would be able to have their pulse on where people are at. And so our life ministry is a huge emphasis for leadership development. But then our people serve. And so when you start serving, and so we use the motto, attend one and serve one. And so I'm convinced that, and we've developed over time what we call our growth pathways. And so what's the next step to take? And so we really line that out and help people take the next step, knowing that we better be good at assimilation. We better be good at getting people connected quick, because we launch so many families. And so, we're 1,500 one year, and to be 1,500 the next year means we've got to grow another 150, 200 people just to stay at the same number of people, because we launched so many people out from the military transition. But in that process, what's happened is more Fairbanksans. The longer we're solid, the more we've got solid Fairbanks people who are growing. And if they're in our groups and they're in our group system, and then they're leading somewhere in a ministry, they're getting that leadership development. But we launch people all the time.
That's great.
I love that. You're not only.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah.
I love also too that you're not only walking through those stressful seasons. You were transparent enough for us to share with us, hey, these were stressful seasons of leadership through explosive growth and problem solving. And how do you get away from preaching all five services? But also your people were going through stress of transition, and you've been walking with them through your small groups, building community. I remember in our doctoral cohort, you would talk about some of the stressed out families, and it was a huge prayer request of yours.
The adaptation to Alaska, and
and I didn't share this, but there was a time, probably 4 years into, or probably at 800 people, and there was some this was a family church, and a family church, if you read church growth stuff, a family church, basically the pastor's their chaplain. And they expect the pastor to show up at the bedside to do everything, and basically they work for the family. And so the board meeting doesn't happen in the boardroom. The board meeting happens around a kitchen table before the boardroom.
Right.
And so I had that. I had a board member. We're at 800 people. My wife, it was hard to find people that wanted to move to Alaska to be on staff. Alaska's not as beautiful as it is. Hey, it is. It's the 19th of October. It won't be above freezing till March.
Right.
Okay. So that's the reality is, it'll be sunny, but it's going to be cold. And so not everyone, it's not like a hotbed for artists and artistic people. And so at this time, my wife's leading worship in 3 gatherings and on like a $600 a month stipend, because the board didn't think that the pastor's wife, she should be free. All of our other pastors' wives were free. And so I had a board member come to my office one day and said, we had a meeting. I said, who had a meeting? The board had a meeting. I said, the bylaws say I call for board meetings. Well, we had a meeting and we'd like you to bring a report to this next week about this. And I said, why don't you get a hold of those that were in the board meeting that you called and tell them that I'm calling the meeting tonight, and let them know the purpose of that meeting is I'll be reading my letter of resignation to the board.
Wow.
And I'm expecting you to either receive it or apologize for acting like a board of directors, not a board of advisors.
Interesting.
And he's like, his eyes got big. And because in our church, and a lot of churches, the board bully whips the pastor.
Yeah.
And so pastors don't have, the stress of knowing, am I the leader, or what do I do? And so and you might not want to share this podcast after the story. I don't know.
No, I think it's real. This is real stuff.
And other people deal with it and don't know what to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had them call the board meeting, and I said, well, we're all 7 board members. He said, well, there's 2 that weren't there. I said, well, why? He said, well, because they wouldn't come. I said, well, I'll call them and invite them. And I had all 7 board members, and I said, here's my letter of resignation. Now there's 2 things that can happen. Number 1, you can receive it and we'll read it on Sunday morning, and I'll go somewhere else because I don't have to be here. I said, God called me. But I've got lots of options besides Fairbanks, Alaska. And quite frankly, I'm not going to be bullied by a board. I'm going to lead. And now I did call. I had Wade Goodall. I have the assistant superintendent of Arizona is a mentor of mine. I called 4 or 5 high capacity leaders and asked them what I should do. So I wasn't just going. I had coached
from the hip.
I wasn't shooting from the hip, so, but I told the board, you can receive this or you can apologize. But here's the ground rules. This is an advisory board, not a board of directors. If you want something on the agenda, please come meet with me. Let's talk. We'll put it on the agenda. But you don't come and demand what I do on the agenda. The church voted me in. You're my advisory board to help me with the vision of the local church. I said, the next time you meet outside of the board, it's because of a moral failure and the superintendent's here, or because of there are times you need to meet without me, or you're conspiring to do something for my wife and I, but you're going to call my executive pastor to do it. Or if there's a moral failure or theology problems, you better call the superintendent, meet without me, talk about those things, and let's have a path forward.
Yeah.
I said, but the next time you meet without me for issues that you're concerned about that you haven't talked to my exec pastor and me with, then I will read my letter of resignation from the pulpit. And at that time, call the superintendent to come up for that meeting as well. And I'm going to ask for you to resign. And so the stress, I mean, we had dynamics were very difficult, and I lost some families, but they were strong families, but they didn't serve. They didn't tithe. It's amazing how sometimes the stress that we pastors have are with people that, we give the squeaky wheel gets the oil. But the squeaky wheel sometimes we spend way too much time on the wrong people. And when I say that is some of the stress that we have is because we want to please people rather than please the King who called us into ministry. And sometimes that means we have to steward disappointment. There's a book, if you've ever read Canoeing Through the Mountains, it's a brilliant book on change.
I haven't read it.
Have you read that book?
No.
Oh my gosh.
Canoeing Through the Mountains.
Canoeing Through the Mountains.
I'll get it.
And it's a book regarding Lewis and Clark and their expedition and how the president hired them, and they took canoes with them, and they hiked up to the top of the Rocky Mountains because their assumption was the other side of the Rocky Mountains looked like the side they just crossed. So they brought canoes. They brought the tools they would need to find a passageway to the West Coast, and they were going to bring all the stuff back, but they got to the top and realized our tools don't work anymore. And so sometimes with churches, we have people who say they assume the other side of the mountains looks like this side of the mountains. And these are people that sometimes are leading churches from the board perspective. And so now granted, I would say this, I've probably lost a dozen families from our church. I haven't lost hundreds. But there's some that I've marginalized their voice because the voice doesn't matter anymore. It's they're still wishing for yesterday.
You're going to have to wait until next week to hear us break this down. But oh my goodness, part 1 with Dr. Mark Zweifel was amazing. Incredible.
So fun, but that's because we also love him so much.
We do.
A really fun conversation.
We do.
So do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can, but man, we learned so much. You go first.
Okay. So he said this right at the beginning, and if you've had any tension or conflict in your church, this hopefully will be encouraging to you. But he said the church is created to fight. But if we don't fight outside the walls, we will fight inside the church. And that is so true. I think what I love about that is he didn't talk about, that he's not talking about fighting culture, because he made such a big deal about the evangelism and how their church is on mission all the time. And he's not just saying that because we all say that, but he really is a gifted evangelist. And I love that he says at the end of every sermon, which you do this too, but he always gives the plan of salvation, but he teaches his people how to do it. He does it the exact same way every week. And so he's creating a culture of evangelism so that the people in his church can go out and win their neighbors, which that's what we should be equipping them to do. I liked what he said. It's better for 100 people to lead one person to Jesus than for one person to lead 100 people to Jesus. So anyway, I love that.
Super powerful, because he transitioned a church that had been there for quite a while.
Yeah. And had been through multiple pastors because they weren't changing and growing. And
so as he started, first it was Fairbanks First Assembly of God, very traditional church that had been through, as he mentioned, 4 pastors in 4 years. So to take that transition, he turned their focus on the mission of God and reaching outward. And then they exploded in growth. And here's what a lot of people know if they're led churches. They understand that a lot of stress comes from growth. And now I know Mark talks a lot about, it's systems. It's either systems or people, essentially.
Systems, skeleton, structure, or staffing.
Yeah, system, structure, or staffing. But if you aren't empowering those people to do that, and what I'm most impressed about Mark is I've watched the shift in him. Wow. To be able to let go, even though, well, you struggle with this, you understand that. You're similar personalities. You're very
that's probably
perfectionism.
Why I like him.
You have that thing going. That's hard.
You're a little bit of workaholic.
I'm
too.
very opinionated about everything. It's hard to let things go.
One thing I think that was wise about not just learning to let things go, but as his church grew, he had the wisdom to realize that the staff personalities and gifting that you need to run a smaller church are not the same personalities and gift packages that you need to run a larger church.
Yeah.
And so you either have to help your people grow through that, or you have to help them see that they need to move on and bring other people in. And that's brutal, but that's a hard part of leadership, is making sure that your staff is equipped correctly for the size church that you have.
Yeah, and I know, and this isn't my favorite part just because it involved us, but honestly, we're just so thankful he's still there. Because when we met Mark in Alaska the first time, he and his family, we saw the stress that he was carrying, the weight that he was carrying, and I saw myself in that. And you guys know my story, and how I shouldn't be here because I allowed stress to manage me rather than me managing it. And Mark made such significant changes that I'm so blown away by.
So quickly, as he does everything.
He's an amazing leader. And listen, we're going to break this down next week. And he really, really is going to get into some of these. How did he actually make this shift in his leadership? So don't miss next week for some more of Dr. Mark Zweifel.